Hi, I'm Chris Predick with Critical Path Training, and we're going to talk about developing BI applications, specifically ExcelServices. So what is ExcelServices? The most important piece to take away from this is that ExcelServices is a server version of the Excel calculation engine. It provides a web-thin client for existing Excel workbooks using the same calculation engine and allows you to pull in data from multiple sources on the server, format them in a workbook, and then expose that data to the end consumer via a REST interface, a JavaScript interface, or the web-thin client that just renders the output of your workbook. So what it really allows is management of Excel content. Previously, Excel documents were sent around via email or shared through a specific shared folder or a site in SharePoint. But that gives you an all or nothing scenario. What if I have a case where I have a workbook where one tab or one sheet presents what the user should see and the other is the raw data? It's okay for them to see the summary. It's not okay for them to see the raw data. There's currently no way of having those both in the same workbook. And that's where ExcelServices allows you to really expose what you want with the appropriate permissions. You can publish this workbook now to a site, mark one part as visible to the end user and not let them see the other, and control permissions to each part via simple management through IT. So this allows us now to expose our content. But we aren't limited to purely letting people look at the workbook. We can expose that data in other ways. So we can publish our workbook of data and then expose it via web service. So I could build a custom add-in to Word that communicates via web services or via REST services to the back-end document, the back-end workbook in SharePoint, and gets back that information and then presents it to the user in some special add-in. That'll allow us to look at that information and use that as our data source. We can also use an object model that's exposed via JavaScript. So I could take a complex calculation that we've put in a workbook, expose it in a web page, and then provide custom HTML elements that execute JavaScript against that document. So I could have a loan calculation document, for example, and I could create a loan calculation page that uses all of the data looked up in the Excel document. So my web page can now communicate with that document, and as values change and as algorithms change, we can just update that Excel document and our page will behave appropriately, all using a JavaScript object model and the Excel calculation engine. So we can also expose existing applications. We've got a lot of data trapped in Excel docs that no one can get to effectively and no one can manage. We can now take that data and expose it via web services, via the web, and we can now push that data out and allow users to interact using that information in ways that they couldn't previously. We can also just take a very simple workbook and allow you to do whatever you need to do. Pivot tables, sorting, filtering. We can take a workbook that attaches to a back-end data cube and analysis services and now expose that via the web for anyone to look at. They don't need direct access to the data cube anymore. They can access the workbook via the web and see the information they need to see. And then finally, we can take our information in ExcelServices and take that and place it into a web part. So I can now build a page that's kind of a mashup scenario where I have some of my data coming from ExcelServices tied together with some data in a chart web part and tied together with other web parts that I've created to bring together all the information I need on a single web part page, with ExcelServices being one of the pieces. It'll allow you to make parameter changes via web part connections, and it allows real-time feedback from that back-end workbook to your specific solutions that you've put together in your web part pages. So let's take a look at a demo of ExcelServices in action. In this demo, we're going to take an existing workbook that ties to a data cube and expose that to the end user via the web interface. So this sample is based on using data in analysis services to create a pivot table and a pivot chart that we're then going to expose via ExcelServices. So you can see in this Excel document I've created a pivot table that's tied to the AdventureWorks database, and it's just showing our internet sales amount broke down by year and broke down by product category. We've also got a pivot chart attached to it so that when we dig in to, for example, bikes, we can see that the pivot chart automatically updates. So they're tied together, they're accessing data in Excel, or excuse me, they're displaying data in Excel that we're accessing from Analysis Services. So what we've done is we've taken this and we've saved it to a folder in SharePoint. Now what we can do now is right-click or click here and get to our Edit or View in Browser option, and we'll see that it's going to render for us in the browser the chart. We can choose our drop-down here and switch back to the pivot table if we'd like. We can even drill in and see more data, although they're going to warn you, because you are now going back to another data source, and if we trust who gave us this workbook, then we can trust who accesses the data. So we're going to say OK, and it's now making a call to the server, and the server is making a call to Analysis Services and adjusting the pivot table. We can see that it would drill in, and now we can switch back to our chart and see that it's adapted as well. What's happening is behind the scenes we have a session that's tied to this workbook, and as it's changing there's a copy that we're working with. We aren't saving it, but it allows us to dig through in the UI. So this gives us a lot of flexibility because now we have the ability to explore the data. We don't require a direct connection to Analysis Services, so I could run this drill through from a web application and I would have no capability of attaching to the Analysis Services database. But ExcelServices is doing that for me using a trusted connection. So it not only exposes that data, but allows us to keep our core connections protected through that web interface provided around the ExcelServices document. So this is all well and good, but it doesn't allow us to tie in this chart to an existing application. So let's now try and find a way to take this chart and display it to the end user in a web part or in the main application page. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go back to the main site, and on that main page we're going to go to the Page option and click Edit Page. We're now going to go add a new web part. So we're going to click Add a Web Part, and we're going to scroll down and find this Office Client Applications section, and we're going to select Excel Web Access. And this web part allows us to connect to an existing ExcelServices site. So we're going to click here to open the tool pane, go to the workbook, and we're going to go to the Shared Documents location and select Internet Sales. So now that we have this item selected, we can say that we want to display Chart 1. Click OK. And now we see that we have that chart displayed for us in the UI. Let's go ahead and drop down this and select back to the pivot table. And let's drill in. Once again, we get our warning. We'll switch back to the chart. And what we see is that this web part contains a document that's connected. So we can switch back and forth and determine how we display the information based on how far we've drilled into the web part. So we'll go ahead and stop editing. And some of the other pieces of functionality that we have here are we have a way to communicate. We can build web parts that communicate, and we also can put multiple web parts on the page. So I could go ahead and add a second web part that's tied to that same document. We're going to once again choose our workbook in Shared Documents, Internet Sales. And this time we're going to display Pivot Table. Click OK. And then let's go ahead and stop editing. And now what we see is that we have two web parts, one displaying the chart and one displaying the table. I'm going to drill into the table one more time. And notice that the bottom chart does not change, but the top chart does. The reason for this is each web part's using its own connection. And we're working in a scratchpad mode in which we're not actually modifying the real document, we're modifying a copy of it in memory. So this allows two different users to use the document independently without stepping on each other's toes. So while it may be a disadvantage in this one case, it's an advantage in another case because it allows us to provide two different ways of accessing that document. So ExcelServices' primary goal is to expose information in Excel to the outside world. And we've seen some examples of how we expose the visual presentation of Excel to the outside world using the browser web access interface. And we've used that to tie into data that's living by the server that you may not have access to from the web browser, but that you can now get limited access to through your Excel document living on ExcelServices on that server.